Welcome to part 2 of the video series where I try to play every game on the Disturbing Games iceberg. This week I was able to play 5 games off the iceberg, plus an additional 2 I haven't finished yet, so we'll just be talking about those 5 this time. Slender is the progenitor of a lot of tiny free indie games, as well as being the primordial soup from which we get a lot of games on this list, being the OG game to play on YouTube. Despite this legendary status, I think this game sucks. Just about every aspect of it works against it in some way. I will praise the atmosphere at the start. When it's just you, the forest, and the ambience before Slenderman shows up, it's good, but that quickly falls apart when the music shows up and Slenderman starts appearing. Let's get this straight. This is a jump scare game, much more so than FNAF, with near constant obnoxious stingers. One big problem I have with this game that's just sort of an example of how every aspect of this game just works against it, is the flashlight. The flashlight is able to run out of battery, and that just doesn't add to the tension. When you don't have it, all it does is make it harder to see the pages. The visual effects with Slenderman when he shows up and the music stinger just make it easy to avoid him whether you have the flashlight or not. I honestly think the game works better if the flashlight had unlimited battery, as if it did, the interiors for the buildings, small amount of buildings in the game, would actually have to be pitch black instead of having this nonsense ambient lighting that they have to have in order to prevent unfair game overs. I will admit I haven't actually finished this game, but I've seen everything it has to offer, as the ending is just one avoidable death. This is very rare for me, as I have a policy of finishing any finishable game before talking about it in this video series, but if the ending is no different from normal gameplay, I don't see a reason to finish, and I don't recommend it. Pokemon Lost Silver. I do think it's cool that this creepypasta got adapted into a real game. I really like that sort of thing when something's fictional is turned into something real, like the fake trailers in Grindhouse getting turned into real movies, like Thanksgiving, Machete, stuff like that. It was a natural fit, as the original story lacks any of the supernatural stuff that makes most of their gaming creepypastas inherently hard to adapt. However, the original story just isn't really good enough to make a good game when adapted. It's themed around the Pokemon unknown, the Bellsprout Tower and Lavender Town to an extent, and has some cool stuff like the unknown Pokemon in your inventory spelling out different words as you progress. I will admit, at one point I had to consult the original creepypasta to figure out what to do next, due to my unfamiliarity with the traditional Pokemon gameplay loop. The ending is a real that's it moment, spoilers, but the basic idea is that the main character dies. Like, this game came out in 2010, the main character died permanently in first person in Call of Duty 4 3 years earlier, and in the ending of Bioshock 2, which came out the same year. Other games have probably been doing that since gaming started as a medium. It's free, it's tiny, and it's on Internet Archive, but it's probably the weakest of the playable creepypastas, It Moves, Duck Season, and Doki Doki Literature Club I've covered thus far. Do I pass? This game isn't really disturbing. It's a short, free experimental game meant to run on Game Boy emulators, but it also runs on web, about a trans girl who's worried she doesn't pass, so she uses a spell that lets her see other people's thoughts to see, depending on whose thoughts you look at, you come away with a different answer to the game's question. It's very short and it's free, so if that sounds appealing to you, check it out. This is actually a game where I can talk about my personal experiences, as I am a transgender woman. However, in my case, the reason I look like that, if you've seen my old videos, and sound like this, is because I'm closeted. I use a girl name and she/her pronouns online as a way of coping. Making these videos did actually require me to take a bit of a leap, since I realised I'm trans, I became increasingly uncomfortable with showing my face and voice online, as I use mostly text-based platforms like Tumblr and Discord to socialise. So even though I don't struggle with passing, I get public-facing dysphoria about the aspects of myself that people worry about not passing, so hearing my own voice is sort of like someone commenting on the size of my hands. Moving on. Pretty random, but I like the way that all of the NPCs are anonymous, whereas only our protagonist is detailed. It reminds me of Sayonara and Dog Days, a visual novel not on this iceberg, where you should absolutely check out. Essentially, all these games make the other characters seem inhuman, as a way of showing how isolated the protagonist is. A movie which also does this is King of Pigs. I might make a whole video of
on games not on this iceberg you should absolutely play. The Snuff Puppy series, consisting of Snuff Puppy Shelter, Loner Dog, Snuff Puppy Carnage Society, XXU, and Dog Days. Dog Days will definitely be on there. And that's also getting another game called The Death of Harsh Noise, which I believe is actually already out. Silence of the Damned. So unlike a lot of not safe for work games on this list, I can't actually show any footage of this game here. The UI has a live female anatomy cam, if you catch my drift, that's always present, and the main character's outfit is pretty revealing, so it'll just be menu footage for now. This is a point-and-click puzzle game that I think was made on a very heavily modified version of RPG Maker, based on some hotkeys and UI elements. You play as a nurse who navigates a hellish environment based on a hospital infested with monsters who will SA her if you run out of health, standard not safe for work game stuff. Aside from that, it's disturbing for featuring an interactive brain surgery sequence, a completely uncensored depiction of childbirth, a depiction of infanticide, and one particularly creative death scene involving a tunnel lined with grinders. Not all at once, of course. For those interested in not safe for work material here, the scenes are pretty uncreative, aside from one which riffs on the hand in the whole scene from Silent Hill 2. For a game meant to show off not safe for work content, the environments are pretty good and the puzzles are intuitive. I'd argue the puzzles are a bit too easy, with only the first puzzle requiring me to actually think about it, with others coming on my first or second attempt. Uniquely, they seem to get easier and simpler as the game progresses, and the earlier one shows a lot more creativity. It's very short. I finished it in under 40 minutes, but you do have to pay for it, so I don't think it's worth your money. It reminds me a lot of Demonophobia, so if you're a fan of that game, check this one out.
Witch's House. This is another RPG Maker game with a sort of fairy tale setup where a young girl gets stuck in the titular witch's house and has to solve puzzles and run from monsters. References include Cinderella, Little Red Riding Hood, Alice in Wonderland, The Wizard of Oz, Rapunzel, and Hansel and Gretel. The puzzles are pretty simple. I didn't seriously struggle with any of them or need to consult a guide at all, but I think they're creative and have interesting solutions. Its scariest moment comes towards the end, when for the only time in the entire game you're plunged into absolute darkness. Would I call it disturbing? Not really, but it mostly reminded me of horror stuff I had when I was a kid, like Goosebumps and the Treehouse of Horror episodes of The Simpsons, but it's good. There's a lot of really good blink and you'll miss it scares that use the limited camera range of the RPG Maker's perspective well. In a lot of first-person horror games you'll end up missing scares by looking in the wrong direction at the wrong time. That happens a lot in Layers of Fear, if I remember correctly, but in Witch's House the game always knows what you can see at any one time and it makes use of that well. The chase segments are pretty horrible, this being an RPG Maker game. A few times they try and do this puzzle where you actually have to double back and spin the target around by going around the target, so it just feels like you're playing shit Dead by Daylight. By the way, if you've ever wondered why every RPG Maker horror game has one-hit kill chases, it's because it's difficult to design a contact damage enemy that doesn't inflict a random amount of damage when it touches you, depending on how many frames it's touching you for. I was trying to design a RPG Maker horror game like this once, and the enemy would inflict a seemingly random amount of damage even if I programmed them to immediately run away because of that weird contact, how weird RPG Maker damage contact is. The game is actually pretty short, being beatable on average in 2 hours, and there's 4 endings which I've gotten 2 of. No, I didn't get the ending which requires you to beat the game without saving, or the joke one. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. I'm currently searching for a job. Once I have one, I'll probably get a better microphone, like a Blue Yeti or something, as I'm currently reliant on my laptop's built-in microphone to record, so my audio is always a bit shit. This video actually took a bit longer than I expected it to because I've been helping look after a member of my family who's currently in the hospital. I actually wanted to apologize here for something I said in a previous video. I described JFK Reloaded as being like a Gmod level, however recently I've been interested in a Danganronpa social deduction fan game that was made in Gmod, so I'd like to apologize to all of the creative and talented Gmod developers out there who I slandered. I hope to see you next time, where I will hope to finally be talking about Yume Nikki and Baldi's Basics.